Biden and Harris, a look at the historic Democrat ticket for president. Catholic schools and security. An expert explains how Hong Kong's national security law is affecting Catholic schools in the former British territory. And care for the vulnerable. Pope Francis asks us to see the human dignity of every person, regardless of race. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, August 12, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. We are getting our first look today at former Vice President Joe Biden and his newly chosen running mate, Kamala Harris. Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press, joins me now from Wilmington, Delaware. Philip, always good to see you. So set the scene for us in Wilmington, Delaware right now.
Well, you can see this is really not your average campaign event, at least not the kind of campaign event we would have seen a few months ago. During a pandemic, well, you're going to see a lot of empty spaces, essentially, both outside of this event that happened here in this high school you see behind me, just a stone's throw from Joe Biden's house, by the way, but also inside of the sports hall here at this high school with no crowd allowed inside, just a handful of journalists to listen to Joe Biden and his new running mate Kamala Harris. Now, the fact that this was a closed event almost entirely to the press and certainly to the public didn't mean that Biden supporters didn't come out. About 100 were standing here right outside of the main entrance to this high school when they found out that actually Biden and Harris were arriving by car. The other side, well, they all ran over to get a glimpse, maybe a sign of there being that little bit of enthusiasm, even during a pandemic, for this new ticket for the Democratic Party. But again, with every campaign event we've been seeing over the last few months, there's just that one thing that's missing, that interaction between voters and the candidates themselves. And that was the case again here in Wilmington.
Well, Philip, can we quickly talk about the historic nature of the selection of Senator Harris as the VP and its significance?
Yeah, of course, it's a historic moment. And of course, with this being such a historic moment, it's even more of a pity, really, that so few people got to see that presentation of Kamala Harris as the new vice presidential running mate for Joe Biden in person. Of course, it is enormously historic, also because of what might potentially come in the future, because we all know that Kamala Harris would be the first female vice president, but there is that distinct possibility of her possibly becoming the first female president because of all of those questions around whether Joe Biden, if he was to be elected, would he truly stay in the White House for one or two mandates, thereby opening the door potentially for a run by Kamala Harris in 2024. Seems a long time away, doesn't it? But it could be a very, very historic move. Right now, in this present moment, Kamala Harris is the first black vice presidential candidate in a major political party in the United States. She has been making a lot of history already. And of course, what she will want to do on this ticket with Joe Biden is convince as many Democrats as possible, both those at the center of the party, the left wing of the party, to vote for them. And that includes, of course, that more progressive wing, if you will, symbolized by Senator Bernie Sanders during these primaries for the Democratic Party. Now, whether these two candidates together can get any Republicans on board, that is a much bigger question. We'll have to wait and see whether they can convince over the next few months. It's, of course, under 100 days now to go until the presidential election in November.
Well, Philip, we have a little less than a minute left, but I'm curious, what can we expect to see from Biden and Harris ahead of next week's DNC?
Well, what you'll see at the DNC is entirely different to what we've seen over the last few years, of course. These will be virtual online appearances. They won't be appearing in person in Milwaukee, where the convention was supposed to happen. These will be videos, live videos, essentially, and presumably with a joint appearance from the two as well. We don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet. But really, what we've seen here today and over the last few months is what we expect this campaign to look like, maybe all the way to Election Day. day with very little contact, again, between voters and the candidates themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that the main dates won't happen. We are still expecting to see 3 presidential debates between Biden and Trump, 1 vice presidential debate between Pence and Harris, and then, of course, the election itself on the 3rd of November. Those key dates are still very much going to happen, but the campaign events that you've been used to over the last few years, they're simply not happening.
Well, Philip, thank you so much. Always appreciate your analysis. Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. Thank you again.
Thank you.
At 55 years old, Senator Kamala Harris offers a contrast to 77-year-old Joe Biden, who, if elected, would become the oldest president ever to take office. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, that's right, Tracy. Senator Kamala Harris, the former Attorney General of California, that is facing criticism for some of the actions that she took, actions that would indicate what the Democratic ticket would support if Joe Biden is, in fact, elected president.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tells me Joe Biden picked the best person to join him on the ticket.
He had many great candidates, so it would have been a happy day in any event. But this is where he was the most comfortable.
As a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Democratic Senator Kamala Harris questioned Brett Kavanaugh before he was confirmed to the Supreme Court.
Can 5 Supreme Court justices overturn any precedent at any time if a case comes before them on that issue?
You start with the system of precedent that's rooted in the Constitution.
Her grilling was praised by some Democrats, but she has also faced scrutiny for her role as former Attorney General for California.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so.
Harris stands by her record.
I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work.
In 2016, as Attorney General of California, she authorized the search of the home of pro-life activist David Daleiden for his undercover videos exposing Planned Parenthood officials discussing the sale of baby body parts. Yesterday, Daleiden tweeted, "Kamala Harris is the greatest threat to First Amendment civil rights our country has ever seen." The vice presidential nominee has vowed she will work to keep abortion legal.
It's important for Catholics to remember that as a presidential candidate, Senator Kamala Harris said if elected, she would direct the U.S. Justice Department to block all pro-life laws from ever taking effect. Tracy?
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you so much, Eric. The group Democrats for Life of America is weighing in with its reaction to Kamala Harris's selection as the Democratic Party's VP nominee. Congratulating the party on nominating a woman of color, the statement continues. Kamala Harris's selection as our party's VP nominee does not provide pro-life Democrats with any assurances and will, in fact, further alienate 21 million Democratic voters who have been left out of the party for quite some time. Joining me now on Skype is Kristen Day, Executive Director of Democrats for Life of America. Kristen, welcome back to the show. Good to have you on. So, some strong words there in your statement. What message do you think Kamala Harris's nomination sends to pro-life Democrats?
Not a very good one. Her position on abortion is more extreme, way more extreme than Joe Biden's. And it's really, really disappointing to have her as the vice presidential nominee. There were a lot of good candidates who maybe could have found somebody a little bit more moderate on this position. But she would like to, have abortion legal for any reason, force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions, and not provide any protections for women who don't want abortion.
Kristen, I know you made it really clear in a piece published last week in the Wall Street Journal that you want to support the Democratic Party, writing, quote, "We don't want Mr. Trump to win. We want to save the party we consider our home." Can you talk a little bit more about what, if any, response that you have received from the Democratic Party ahead of next week's convention?
We have not received anything from the party other than silence, preventing us from having our voices heard. The party put out a call to action to submit videos to say what you want to see from the party. And when our pro-life Democrats tried to submit video. They were not allowed to be put up on the site. So it's very frustrating that they have really taken on this position that is out of touch with mainstream America and pushing forward this position on abortion and thinking that it's a winning strategy.
I know that you're hosting a pro-life caucus next Monday. Can you talk more about that and how you're planning to make the voices of pro-life Dems heard?
We are so excited about being in Milwaukee next week, and the response is just overwhelmingly positive from our members and people all around the country. Our membership has increased. Our donations have gone up. People are just clamoring to get involved and help and see how they can further our position and voice within the party. So for this nominee to have such an extreme position on abortion has really motivated the pro-life Democrats to get out there and say, this is not what we want for our party, and we're going to affect change.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Kristen Day, Executive Director of Democrats for Life of America. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All the attack ads are already flying from both sides. The Trump campaign calls Senator Kamala Harris a leftist who will push a radical agenda. Correspondent Owen Jensen brings us more reaction from the White House. Owen.
Tracy, tonight in the race for the White House, make no mistake about it, the gloves have come off.
It's game on between President Donald Trump and his Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, in the race for the White House. Just watch these two attack ads launched by both sides.
Biden calls himself a transition candidate. He is handing over the reins to Kamala while they jointly embrace the radical left. Slow Joe and phony Kamala. Perfect together, wrong for America.
In the middle of a pandemic, the president is trying to rip away health care. While small businesses close, he's given breaks to his wealthy donors. And when the people cried out for support, he tear-gassed them.
And the president's reaction to Biden's pick?
I was more surprised than anything else because she did so poorly. Many people did much better than her in the primaries. She did very poorly in the primaries. And that's like a poll.
And Biden tweeting, if Kamala Harris and I are elected, we're going to inherit multiple crises. A nation divided and a world in disarray. We won't have a minute to waste. That's exactly why I picked her. She's ready to lead on day one. Meanwhile, on the unceasing pandemic front,
we have reached an agreement with Moderna to manufacture and deliver 100 million doses of their coronavirus vaccine candidate.
And in the administration's push to reopen schools, many districts are going online only this fall. Florida's education commissioner told me outside the White House.
But over here in this world where you don't send kids back, the risk is absolutely profound. The risk is absolutely damaging for a lifetime, whether it's suicides or drug overdoses or food insecurity or academic achievement gaps getting exacerbated. All of that is so much greater over here.
Earlier today here at the White House, the president held a Kids First event designed to help kids get back to school safely this fall. There were teachers there, parents, doctors. They all agreed on one thing, that distance learning just does not cut it. Tracy?
All right. Thank you so much. I'm White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Coming up, China reacts to an American's high-profile visit to what China calls a renegade province. Plus, a look at how Catholic schools in Hong Kong are dealing with the new national security law. Humanitarian agencies with the United Nations are working to bring much-needed help to the people of Beirut following last week's devastating explosion.
Many households don't have access to clean water supply because of damages to the connections between water sources and buildings and within buildings.
UNICEF is also delivering water to port workers and first responders, as well as trucking water to the Lebanese Red Cross. UN agencies also say 14 search and rescue teams from 11 countries are searching for survivors of last week's explosion. 300,000 people lost their homes in the blast. The U.S. Secretary of State praises the security partnership with the Czech Republic. Mike Pompeo met with the prime minister and also says Sunday's elections in Belarus were not fair.
We watched an election that we were very concerned about. It wasn't held in a way that was free and fair. We care about that because we care deeply about the Belarusian people. Just as I talked about in the Czech Republic, we want We want the people of Belarus to have the freedoms that they're demanding, that they think are in their best interests. We watch the protests. We urge that the nonviolent protesters be protected and not harmed.
More journalists and protesters were arrested last night. Thousands have been detained in the 3 days of protest. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled since 1994 and is known as the last dictator of Europe. In Israel, protests against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are drawing a new breed of first-time protesters who say they are watching their life savings disappear.
I'm afraid that, like many other families, I will thrown out of the apartment. I would, like, the credit card won't go while I'm paying for groceries.
More people are attending the nightly protests, which often turn into street parties. They are angry about the COVID-19 restrictions and also say Netanyahu should not be prime minister while he is on trial for corruption. China is lashing out at U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar for visiting Taiwan. China's foreign ministry says he, quote, abandoned millions who are struggling with COVID-19 and instead staged a political show. Secretary Azar was the first American cabinet official to meet with Taiwan's president in over 3 decades. China considers Taiwan a renegade province. China's new national security law is already starting to impact the Catholic education system in Hong Kong. The Diocese of Hong Kong has sent a letter to nearly 200 schools asking them to explain the provisions of the new law and encourage patriotic values to students. The law came into effect on July 1st. Joining us to talk more about this issue is Benedict Rogers, human rights activist and writer. Thank you so much for joining us today, Benedict. So I would like to start off by talking about the law. We know the 4 types of criminalization, but what are the penalties for anyone convicted under the law?
Well, the penalties vary. It is an incredibly draconian law that essentially criminalizes contact with foreign political groups. So that can mean Hong Kong people who talk to someone like me or talk to foreign parliamentarians or journalists. And then there are the categories of subversion and sedition. And the penalties vary between up to 10 years, but in some cases up to life imprisonment.
How has the Chinese government tried to introduce the recent security laws to Catholic schools in Hong Kong?
Well, this is particularly alarming. First of all, the Chinese government has imposed this law on Hong Kong itself and really fast-tracked it through the National People's Congress and imposed it at the beginning of July. And now we've learnt in the last few days that Catholic schools are being told that they have to educate children in what the national security law means. And I think my interpretation of that is that it will be a real intrusion into education in terms of freedom of conscience, in terms of academic freedom. And it's an effort really to, in effect, brainwash children in Hong Kong along the Chinese Communist Party's lines. We've already seen books being withdrawn from libraries, including school libraries, books that are regarded as sensitive. And now we see this intrusion into specifically the Catholic education sector.
Benedict, what's been the response from the Catholic Church in Hong Kong?
Well, the response has been mixed. Of course, the very courageous cardinal, the emeritus Bishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen, who's long been an outstanding critic of the Chinese regime in Beijing, has continued to speak out. He said he's ready to go to prison. The auxiliary bishop, also Bishop Joseph Ha, has for some years been a prominent defender of human rights, and he's courageously outspoken. But unfortunately, the cardinal and some other clergy have taken a position that is more supportive, or perhaps not supportive, but they've obviously come under pressure from the Chinese regime, and they have denied the gravity of this draconian law and said that it's acceptable. So opinion is divided.
I'm wondering, have there been any updates on how Catholic pro-democracy activists Jimmy Lai and Agnes Chow are doing following their recent arrests?
Well, they were both arrested, of course, on Monday. They then, after about 36 hours in detention, were both released, along with others who were arrested, on bail. And there were amazing scenes of Jimmy Lai going to the newsroom of his newspaper, the newspaper he founded and owns, the Apple Daily, which is the only pro-democracy Chinese language newspaper in Hong Kong. And he was greeted and welcomed very emotionally by his staff after being released on bail. But of course, he faces, and Agnes Chow faces, a trial that could lead to very severe prison sentences.
Benedict, we only have a few minutes, but I'm wondering, what are the prospects on religious freedom in Hong Kong in light of the current relations between the Vatican and China?
I think the threat to religious freedom in Hong Kong is very grave indeed. Hong Kong until now has been the only part of China that where religious freedom has not directly been affected, and churches can worship freely, as can other places of worship. I think there will now be a serious threat, not necessarily to freedom of worship and the existence of churches, but I think things like the monitoring of homilies will begin, so that priests and clergy who preach on issues of human rights and justice and human dignity may find themselves on the wrong side of the law. Churches that have taken part in candlelit prayer vigils during protests, given shelter to protesters, may find themselves in trouble. So, I mean, the reality is wherever freedom itself is eroded, religious freedom is affected too, and Hong Kong's freedoms are being dismantled by the day, and that will include religious freedom.
Well, Benedict, thank you so much for your time and for your analysis today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Up next, a call to care for the weak and vulnerable in today's weekly audience with Pope Francis. A temporary victory for the pro-life movement in Arkansas. A federal appeals court is allowing rules on abortions to take effect. They include a ban on abortions based on the sex of the baby, regulations on tissue of aborted babies, and stopping the so-called dilation and evacuation abortion method. Finally tonight, Pope Francis reminds the faithful to take care of one another, especially those who are suffering.
Quanto siamo tutti vulnerabili e interconnessi.
The Holy Father reminded Catholics to see the human dignity of every person, regardless of race. He said the pandemic highlighted how vulnerable and interconnected everyone is, and therefore the need to care for all people, especially those who are seen to be the least in society. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.